absolutely delighted to welcome back to the Institute Peter Hitchens, writer, journalist, former editor-in-chief, a former foreign correspondent who started out as a Trotskyite.
Trotskyist.
Trotskyist. Are those two different factions, or just the correct way of describing it?
Trotskyite is a term of abuse.
Trotskyist. Okay. But I understand, people, that's a disease that you say that you have not only been cured from, but are now inoculated against. Peter was on hand to witness the collapse of the Soviet Union and the communist dictatorships in Eastern Europe. He's, of course, writes for the Mail on Sunday, is author of The Abolition of Britain, The Rage Against God, and for those of you who came to the last Snowden-Hitchens debate will also know he is the author of Drugs, the War We Never Fought. Our second speaker this evening is the IA's very own Christopher Snowden. Chris is the Director of Lifestyle Economics at the IAA, covering issues around alcohol, gambling, tobacco, sugar, all the things the government loves to regulate and tax heavily. Actually, that would apply to a much wider list of topics than that. So, on the topic at hand tonight, British summertime, should it be scrapped? Peter has described British summertime as lying about the time, its supporters as clock-shifting fanatics. Chris, on the other hand, describes it as a glorious invention and a rare victory for Bohemians over Puritans. I'm going to ask each of them to speak for about 10 minutes, then I'll give them a chance to respond to each other's comments. I will try and come up with some questions for both Peter and Chris as well, but I'll also take interventions from the floor. So Peter, welcome back to the IA. Good to see you here. The floor's very yours.
Hi. Does anybody here know the Esperanto for good evening? I thought not. Nobody knows the Esperanto for anything. And yet Esperanto is one of those things, like shifting the clocks and weaving your trousers out of vegetable soup and sandals and all kinds of other revolutionary ideas of the Edwardian period, which never actually took off, except for the pushing forward and backwards of clocks incessantly. I have two texts for this evening. One is from a houseman, to think that 2 and 2 are 4, and neither 5 nor 3. The heart of man hath long been sore, and long is like to be. And from Louis MacNeice, the glass is falling, hour by hour. The glass will fall forever, but if you break the bloody glass, you won't hold up the weather. This is a question of measurement, rather than of reality. And I'll begin with a short story about the rearrangement of boundaries after the collapse of the Soviet Union between Russia and Belarus. Now, there was a certain amount of dispute about where the boundary should run, and so a commission was set up, and they walked along the very, very long boundary through marshland and forest. And eventually, when they decided where to draw the line, they found a little cottage with an old woman living in it. And they said to her, look, we can draw the line round the left-hand side of your house or around the right-hand side of the house. It really is a matter of whether you want to be in Russia or in Belarus. Can you tell us which you'd rather be in? And after a bit of thought and a cup of tea, she said, actually, do you know, I think I'd rather be in Belarus. And they said, all right, we'll draw the line around there. Could you just explain to us why, though? We're fascinated to know why you've chosen Belarus. He said, you know, I can't stand those long Russian winters. It is much of this nature that we are discussing. Time is something which does actually exist and which has a reality and which can be measured in the relationship between the sun at its zenith and the surface of the earth. But all kinds of peculiar things can be done to it by human beings. I, for instance, did once fly backwards across the international dateline. An interesting experience which took me from Monday afternoon, I still have to struggle to remember it, Monday afternoon in Providenia, Siberia, to the previous Sunday afternoon in Nome, Alaska, where I promptly had lunch for what must have been the second time that day. It is a confusing thing, and you have to work out very hard why it is so, and it is a man-made thing, because of course you don't actually change from one day to another at all. The day remains the same. So, what are we talking about here? Why is it that people wish to move the clocks around? There's a famous statement by a Native American elder who was confronted with the pale-faced habit of changing the clocks backwards and forwards from time to time, said only the pale-faces could conceivably imagine that by cutting a foot off the top of the blanket and sewing it onto the bottom of the blanket would they make the blanket longer. And it is this misconception that we face. Actually, the misconception summed up in the title of what this used to be called daylight saving time, or indeed the summed up in the campaign which was recently launched to put this country on the same time as Berlin, which entitled itself Lighter Later, in the belief that it would be lighter later. Well, of course it would be lighter later, but it would also simultaneously be darker later at the other end of the day. So what had you gained? What you gain or lose is in fact a matter to some extent of lifestyle. And you will find, and it's interesting the mention of bohemianism in my opponent's summary of his case, that he's absolutely right. Most of the people who want to push the clocks forward in the spring are people who never get up before about 11 o'clock in the morning. You have no idea what the morning looks like. But on the other hand, do go to bed quite late, and I don't really notice the evening, because they're always in subterranean places, while the rest of us who enjoy evenings are out watching the slow fading of the light, something they don't seem to be particularly keen on. In fact, in the past few days, it's just if you were actually aware of what's going on, if you either get up early, if you travel home in the twilight, you've been watching over the past few weeks the slow withdrawal of night and evening from the land, the sort of gentle disrobing, suddenly replaced on Easter Sunday by a violent striptease, where the evening is stripped in a moment of an hour of what would otherwise have been gentle progress. For what? In a few weeks' time, you would have had it anyway. It's all very well rejoicing over the evening being light now, but actually, if you get up early as I do, the mornings have suddenly become dark. And what purpose is served? I cannot actually discover what purpose is served. It is completely impossible to penetrate the reason for this. The originators of this idea, an infuriating, pestilential, speculative builder called Willits, who loved playing golf late in the evening and thought that as a result everybody else should have their clocks changed. And he also would ride around the suburbs on his horse, sneering and cursing at the people who were still in bed, though he'd got up early. The reason for this, of course, being that speculative builders, when they go to bed, aren't particularly tired, and so they can get up early, whereas the people who they employ to build their horrible houses are tired and want to stay in bed in the morning. He couldn't understand that, so he thought they should all be routed out of bed. These genuinely, and a bug hunter in New Zealand who liked hunting butterflies late into the evening, are the originators of an idea which was actually brought into being by none other than Kaiser Wilhelm II in a frenzy of supposed reform, and in fact of attempting to make his country's war economy more efficient. I don't know. I haven't been able to find, perhaps someone can draw to my attention anything which establishes that in any way the moving forward of the clocks in the German Empire in 1916 made the German war effort or German industry more effective or efficient than they'd ever been before. There's a huge scarcity of real, solid, objective evidence that any of this does any good. What we're actually confronted here is simple human bossiness. And the fact that it actually took place for the first time in wartime and was then abandoned after the end of the First World War is a sure sign of this. Wars are a wonderful opportunity for bossy people to tell other people what to do. Look, if you want to go to bed very late and get up very late, that's fine by me. You can do it. I absolutely have no objection. But don't tell me when to get up and when to go to bed. This is what I ask. Now, since I think we're probably more or less evenly divided in our society between those people who like to get up early and those people who don't, the default position really ought to be to leave things as they are. And here's the important thing. There is a place where they are. Time is real. Noon actually happens. If you still have access to sundials, as some of you luckily will, you'll find that they actually do reflect a genuine relationship, as I said, between the surface of the Earth and the zenith of the sun. It happens. Sunrise and sunset actually happen. Time is one of those things which even the most fanatical of metricators and decimalisers have never been able to metricate and decimalize. Believe me, they try. The French revolutionaries, they came up, I think, with a 10-hour day, certainly with a 10-day week, which you can see the disadvantages of immediately when you realise how much less frequently the weekend comes around, and all kinds of other variations, and indeed an entire new calendar, which is very beautiful, but which nobody observed, because time doesn't fit idealists. Time exists whether idealists want it to or not. It has a shape and a size and a rhythm which exists whatever people want to do with it. So, there is an actual default position, and therefore, since there is no majority agreement about whether we should have the clocks forward or not, Wouldn't it just make sense in a free country to leave them exactly where they are? Apart from anything else, most of you to this day probably can't remember whether they go forward or backwards in April, or backwards or forwards in October, or have any idea what good it is all doing. That is my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Respond, Chris.
Thank you. And good evening. And as Mark says, what a beautiful evening it is. It's great to see so many people here today. That's not surprising, though. It's well established that people do go out more when the clocks go forward, and people watch television a lot less, which is one of the reasons that the television industry, one of the few people who are still against British summertime after 100 glorious years. There are two particular misconceptions, straw men really, about my position on British summertime. And Peter has spent most of his opening remarks kind of regurgitating them. One is that people like me believe that by changing the clocks you somehow gain an extra hour of daylight. That is obviously not what we think at all. It is not about gaining an extra hour of daylight, magic it up from thin air. It's about where the daylight is and where the best time in the day to have daylight might be. The issue therefore is how we structure society. It's not that the time clearly is something that we have no control over. It is very real, but what we do have control over and what is artificial and man-made are timetables and clocks. And so when you have a scarce resource, which sunlight is, particularly in this country, it's an economic question in the sense that you decide how you're going to use it to best effect. And my basic position, what I'll be arguing today, is that it's better to have daylight when everybody is awake than when most people are asleep. It's as simple as that. And it's not really a question, and this is the second kind of rather inane statement that's often made about this issue, it's not a question of getting up earlier. Yes, people will often say, if you care so much about having this extra daylight, why don't you just get up early? Well, of course, you can do to some extent, but actually, it's very unrealistic to expect people to be getting up at daybreak in May or June. I mean, today, for example, if we hadn't changed the clocks last week, the sun would have risen about 5:40 a.m. and it would set about 6:30. It would set by now. Now you can say 5:40, it's just about doable to get up at that kind of time. Perhaps so. The reality is most people don't and never will. But by the time you get to the middle of June, the sun would be rising, if we didn't have British summertime, the sun would be rising at 3:40. Now this, I don't think even Peter gets up at 3:40 in the morning. It seems to me quite obvious that we have at least 2 or 3 hours of totally pointless sunlight. And then at 8 o'clock in the evening, it gets dark again. We all have to switch the lights on. We start using all the electricity and so on, quite needlessly. We need to structure a society that uses daylight to best effect, and having it at 4 o'clock in the morning clearly is not using daylight to best effect. Now, William Willett, who Peter just mentioned, this story is quite true. He was inspired by horse riding at 7 a.m. and taking it. He was like Peter, an early riser. He would ride around the suburbs and appreciate the nature, the fresh air, and all the rest of it. But he noticed that he was virtually the only person out there doing that. And whereas some people would have said, right, well, this is a cause for forcing people in some way to get up earlier, he decided to take people as they were and to move them out into Mohammed. If people aren't going to get up early and they're going to miss this daylight, then we'll change the clocks and people can enjoy the daylight in the evening. And it is, let's face it, better to have the daylight in the evening than it is to have it early in the morning. Clearly better to have it at 4 o'clock in the morning. I think everybody surely would accept that having it light at that time is quite needless. But even better than having it at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. Not just because not everybody's up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, even it's not an issue purely for degenerates like me who might want to stay in bed. Perfectly ordinary people will not be up at 6 o'clock in the morning, particularly at the weekends. But even those who are up and about at that kind of time are not, I would argue, going to enjoy their time as much as they would do later on in the day. And that's because people prefer generally to have their recreation after work than before work. You can, in theory, in the middle of June, wake up at 3:40 and have a gin and tonic in your garden. But I would argue that you're going to get more people interested in doing that. People are going to get more benefit from doing that if they do it at 9 o'clock and watch the sun gently set. And the same is true of playing tennis or playing cricket, watching sports, going out, enjoying yourself, walking around the park and so on. People are not only more likely to do this in the evening, but they actually get more benefit from having their recreation when they've finished work rather than when they are preparing for it. So the argument that people should merely get up earlier in the morning very quickly breaks down when you realise that it's not about people using as much daylight as they can. It's about having a society in which people, let's face it, with time you have a collective action problem. It's not the law that you have to put your clocks forward or back. You can set your clocks to whatever you want, but there is clearly, even for a rampant individualist libertarian like me, I can see the problem of having everybody using different times. And perhaps if we had no railways and if we had no electricity, perhaps people would get up very much like animals do. They would wake with the sunrise and go to sleep with the sunset. But we don't have that. We do have timetables, we do have clocks, we do have hours of work. So when you say we can just get up earlier, you also need to add to that, we can get up earlier and we need to change office hours from 9 to 5 to 8 to 4, and then we need to change the TV schedule, so we have the news at 6, at 5 o'clock, and we need to change the railway timetables and the bus timetable and everything else around it, because the point is you are changing how everything works. You're not just changing how one individual might choose to enjoy their daylight at different times. Clearly it is much easier simply twice a year to change the clocks than it is to expect society to change the time at which it does everything else. So that's basically my argument, that light in the evening is objectively, I think, better, because people relax after work, not before it. It does happen to have various other benefits. The Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents is very keen on having British summertime throughout the year. There is very good evidence that accidents on net do decline if you have later evenings for various different reasons. Motorists tend to be more tired coming back from work than before, so it's better that you have light then. Kids tend to wander off after school, whereas before school they tend to go straight there. There are various reasons, and it's quite well established from the experiment in the late 60s that you basically have more accidents in the morning but fewer accidents in the evening.
Point of information here. Whatever you say about this, it is a checkable fact from the national statistics. The number of road deaths rose during that period.
The number of road deaths
actually rose. The number of deaths on the road rose during the period of that experiment.
My understanding is quite the opposite.
You're only telling me what understand what is the case.
Well, let me put it another way. The fact is, road deaths declined. They rose in the morning. I won't try and be polite about this anymore. It's the fact that road deaths declined on net. They went up in the morning, went down in the evening, but they went down more in the evening than went up in the morning. So they declined. They declined overall. That wasn't the reason the experiment was ended in 1971. You also have as I've already alluded to, you also have decline in energy consumption for obvious reasons. You need to have more electrical light in the evening if it's unnecessarily dark. It's been estimated that if we went to British summertime all year round, we would save about 500,000 tonnes of CO2 per year. That may not particularly be of interest to many of you. It's not particularly of interest to me, so nevertheless it is a point that works to my advantage, so I'll make it and pretend it's very significant. But there is a significant thing behind that, which is that we are needlessly consuming energy and spending money lighting our homes and entertainment venues when we needn't be. But the more fundamental fact is that it allows people to do the things they want to do. The fact that television viewing goes down by about 10-15% is it because people are going out and doing things that they would rather do than watching television, and that ultimately is surely what we should be aiming for, to allow people to fulfil their desires, which they are much better able to do by having light evenings rather than having very light, very, very early mornings when nearly everybody is asleep. So that is my they're my opening remarks. That yes, of course, time is very real. It's the things that society does around it which are man-made, artificial, and that we can change and we should change, and not be distracted by sort of this naturalistic fallacy that the sun has to be exactly at the zenith of the sky at midday. In actual fact, the sun is hardly ever at the zenith at exactly 12 o'clock noon, even in Greenwich, let alone in Penzance, when it's generally about 12:45 over in Norwich, Glasgow. It changes all around the place. So the fact that you think that in some cosmic way midday should literally be the middle of the day is not actually an argument for not changing the clocks. It's an argument for changing the clocks every single day and having a different time in every part of the country, because there is no such. It is not as simple as Peter is making out. And anyway, it doesn't matter. We're not here to go along with this entirely arbitrary system of having the sun exactly at the top of the sky. In Paris, the sun is at its zenith around about 1 o'clock most of the year. In summertime, it's nearer 2 o'clock. It varies enormously. It doesn't
make man do that.
Well, be that as way. Good on the Germans. You know, I'm not here. It's been 70 years. I say forgive and forget.
Chris, thanks very much. I think I've heard you speak many, many times, but I can say with confidence that's the first time I have ever heard you be a climate change alarmist and speak about the perils of watching television elegantly. Let me allow each of our speakers the floor just again, and let me just sort of throw a couple of questions in for reasons of clarification. Peter, am I to understand that your issue is about the clocks changing rather than necessarily what system we're on? I mean, would you mind if we just stuck on British summertime forever? Your issue is the kind of manipulation of a shift. I mean, you wouldn't really care what we fix the time at, as long as we fix it and stick it.
I think every country has a compromise over time. Time is about power. As you'll find in large parts of continental Europe, time is about power. The European Union imposes and tries to impose on all its members the same Central European time, what I call Berlin time. And in China, if you're in Kashgar, in the far west in Chinese Turkestan, it doesn't get light till 10 o'clock in the morning because they're all forced to be on Peking time. Time is very much a demonstration of power. If you control your own territory, you control your own time. Greenwich is a compromise over what time we should have, but obviously with railways and broadcasting and all kinds of other timetables, you have to have an agreement within a country, if it's small enough, over what time you should compromise over. But I think that compromise should be as near as possible to where nature is. And for us, for instance, to have, as the Lighter Laser campaign wanted, for us to have time which is based on a meridian running about 70 miles east of Berlin was ludicrous. And it would have meant, for instance, that in the winter months it would have still been dark in London at 9 o'clock in the days after Christmas, as it is in Paris now, because although Paris is very close to our own meridian, they are forced, for historic reasons, to abide by German time. And so are lots of other countries, and that's the reason why they do it. Portugal found it so unbearable that they actually abandoned it. So there has to be some connection between the time that you have. Now, what I'm against is moving it about as well. The moment you think about it, as with so many other things, is the moment you begin to realise how important it is. And I've experienced time zones and the way in which they're manipulated in all kinds of places, and I like having our own time, and I don't see why it should change. I don't think any good argument is to be made for changing it. By the way, I thought the reason why people didn't watch so much television in the summer was because it was all repeats.
Do you think, to Chris's point where he was sort of portraying potential chaos, I mean, do you think that people, timetables and the like, would adapt? I mean, so would it be the case, actually, that, I don't know, at the IEA we would sort of say, right, during the winter months our working hours are 9 to 5, and during, we pick some arbitrary time, you know, after Easter Day our working hours are 8 to 4, and train times will be moved forward, football kick-off times would be moved forward, and wouldn't humans just adapt to that? If Chris is right that people want natural light in order to achieve certain things.
A lot of this natural light is at a time when it's not really very much use to anybody. Whatever you do, even if you shift the clocks forward, there's still an enormous amount of light in the early morning with most people, apart from farmers who like the way the sun dries off the grass before they cut the hay, for instance, don't actually feel any need for it, and that's why people have curtains. And unless we do revert to cave dwelling, I don't see that period is ever going to be of any use. But why are we more willing to acknowledge that we are actually civilized and aren't cave dwellers? We can light our homes, our places of entertainment, with electricity after it gets dark. So why don't we? There's nothing unpleasant about it in my experience. People don't not go into pubs or restaurants because they're artificially lit. In fact, they quite like it. And I don't. It's a measure of civilization that we don't follow exactly. But you won't by moving the clocks forward an hour. You don't actually dispose of very much more light. And is it so much use to? How many of us actually go out and play tennis in the evening? Really? It's not. What most people do is they sit drinking, which they could equally well do in the dark. So it's not really and truly isn't a very powerful argument.
Let me just to follow up a bit more on this. The issue of force, because or coercion, you sort of say the sort of French are forced to be on Berlin time. I genuinely don't know what the legal status of this is actually in the UK or elsewhere. I mean, I mean, obviously everybody follows. This is a matter of convention.
If I'm Boris Johnson, I can make up a number now, but there is an EU directive. There really is one. It's a fantasy one, which says that the clocks must go forward, usually on Easter Sunday or something, and then back again in all European Union countries. It doesn't stipulate what they must go forward to or from. You can have your own time still, though they would like to abolish that. They haven't managed to do that. But you are compelled to move the clocks forward and backwards by a European Union directive.
But why haven't, for example, given what you've just said about Paris, why hasn't the French government chosen to switch to GMT with what would be, or I don't even know, it would be the French government, the French clock authorities, or whoever the hell it would be?
L'État français is always the thing that's in charge there. But no, the reason why they do is the reason why they don't do the euro. France will do all manner of cultural cringes to be communautaire. And it's one of the things over which it is communautaire. Though originally, the French time was a big dispute because the Greenwich Meridian runs pretty much as close to Paris as to London over whether it would be Greenwich time or French time would be the zero, which is an artificial mark on longitude. That's all. But the French were compelled, as were the Belgians in the First World War, were compelled by the Germans to undergo Central European time, and it's been one of the features of the exertion of power by Germany, the real centre of the European Union, which, as you all know, is the continuation of Germany by other means. That all European Union nations, which possibly can, are compelled to follow Central European time, and France is one. It's one of those things that they do. They can have a nuclear weapon, which they can't use, but they can't decide where their clocks are. In fact, if you read, as you all should, Jean-Paul Sartre's Rose to Freedom, in the final volume where Mathieu Delarue is captured, one of the things that happens as they all mill around under German guns in the prisoner of war camps is they're instructed to put their watches forward to German time. That was the moment when it happened. And they've done it ever since. And it would have happened to us too, as indeed metrication would have done, had they arrived here in the same fashion. It's a national humiliation. I don't know why people put up.
Chris, let me come back to you. You can respond to some of Peter's points. I'm interested in trying to tease out what the statistics are here. You included in disagreement about the number of, I don't know, road deaths or what's been saved here. But why, as a libertarian, Chris, aren't you sort of happy to allow the sort of wisdom of crowds to prevail, will adapt, will change? If the IEA's opening hours can shift, if it's a matter of such importance to the staff, and will open earlier during the summer and later during the winter, what's the problem?
There will be no problem with that, and there are all sorts of incentives for business to do that already. If you look at the state of the trains at commuting times, it seems remarkable that there aren't more businesses opening at 10 to 6 rather than 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. It never happens. I think because there's a collective action problem and there's a sort of a first adopter.
There isn't a collective action problem. The train can get you into London for 10 to 6. So why?
But nobody wants to be the first mover for some reason. It just doesn't happen. I mean, it would make a lot of sense. The staff, most of the time, I think, would be quite happy with that, and it never seems to happen. Perhaps we should try it here and see how we get on. There does seem to be a tremendous incentive to do it, and yet it doesn't happen. So I think it's completely naive to think that we can sort of get around this by changing everything else. And remember, this is not, I don't think this is a libertarian issue at all. It is not a crime not to put your clock forward in spring. You can do what you wish. Perhaps some people even do, I don't know. But there are clear advantages to doing the same thing as everybody else. And the time as we know it, the Greenwich Mean Time, the system of clocks in the hour is largely kind of a hangover from the railways. I mean, until then, actually, there was all sorts. People did have different times all over the place. Whatever you put up on your church clock tower was the time in your village, and it didn't really affect anybody else if you were 10 minutes or 15 minutes or even an hour different. But I would like to come back to this, what I think is a sort of naturalistic fallacy. I think Peter is dwelling on a couple of things which border kind of superstition, really. He brings up the cave dwellers. It seems to me that a cave dweller mentality would be to refuse to change something very simple just because you believe that there is something holy and mystical and special about the sun being at a certain point in the sky. And to order your society with obvious disadvantages of wasting hours of perfectly good daylight for the sake of having this mathematical purity of the sun being roughly, but actually not quite, and in most places of the country not at all, at its zenith at exactly midday. I see no reason at all to follow that. That seems to me to be quite a backwards and superstitious way of looking at it. And all this stuff about the Germans is not superstition, it's conspiracizing, really. I mean, I do not believe it's a Germanic plot to do anything. I don't see what they stand to gain from it in the first place. It's crackpot talk, some of this.
And tell us, because there may be a little bit of trading of statistics here, but what evidence do you want to adduce that the switch to British summertime, whatever it was, less kids are harmed in road accidents on their way to school or on their way home from school or whatever it might be?
I can't quote you chapter and verse on this, but I do know that the Royal Society for Prevention of Accidents is very keen, not just on keeping the current system, but actually extending it into the winter months as well, because they are convinced that the evidence from certainly the late 1960s, if not earlier, does show an overall decline in presumably pedestrian deaths and maybe overall traffic accidents. And there are, I think, plausible reasons for that. I think some of this stuff, I think a lot of the objections actually, and indeed some of the reasons people like me give on both sides, I think are increasingly irrelevant. I mean, children don't walk to school like they used to. We haven't really got milkmen very much, so they're not affected. Postmen seem to deliver the post about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Farmers have never really, insofar as farmers have ever cared about it, it matters less and less now. Farms are very much set up for the night time. People are harvesting literally in the middle of the night, sowing, spraying crops. So the objections that were raised as recently as the 60s actually are less and less relevant, and as a result of that, hardly anybody's against it. The National Farmers Union has no position on it, but the last opinion poll they did of their members showed actually there was a slight majority of farmers want to go to BST all year round. So we haven't got a lot of opposition except from people like Peter in the TV industry.
I'm going to come back to Peter on that. I'll come to the floor for questions as well, so try and catch my eye from the floor if anybody would like to ask a question. But the reason, Chris, why I have just instinctively, I don't really know where I stand on this issue, I don't even know if I care about it actually. The reason I instinctively prefer Peter's position is for sort of libertarian reasons, although you correctly, I think, point out, it's not a criminal offence not to put your clock forward at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning or whenever they're supposed to go forward. There does seem to me something about this being a kind of collective effort towards perfectionism. So do you think it is right that we change the clocks forward once a year and back once a year? Or in order to better deploy the scarcity of sunlight, should we not put the clocks forward by, say, 10 minutes on the first of each month as we get to the summer, and then sort of back 10 minutes, or a minute each weekend?
That was Willitz's original plan. He wanted to do it in stages of 20 minutes.
So why
it was practical.
If we've got some great scheme to sort of perfectly deploy the scarcity of sunlight, why only go through this ceremony on 2 occasions a year? Why not, especially in the digital age where you could, your iPhone could automatically update by a minute once every week? Why not go for a much more sophisticated system to make sure that the scarcity of sunlight is even more optimally deployed?
I think because the opportunity cost would be too great. There is a opportunity cost of some sort with changing the clocks, and if you've got an iPhone, I quite agree, it does it all. But Big Ben has to be changed, church clocks have to be changed, a certain amount of labour has to go into changing the clocks. It is more than offset by the economic benefits of changing clocks, but if you did it every day or every week, clearly those costs would start to mount up. So I think it's a practical problem. I think theoretically you're probably right that when it comes to the middle of May, you could quite happily have an extra hour. But there is where do you draw the line with this? Clearly Peter is upset as it is. I don't want to upset him any further.
Yes, you do.
But I just want to pressure a little bit on this part, because of course I can see that's true, and I imagine most households don't have sundials but still have manual clocks in them. But increasingly we are going to move to entirely digital measurements of this that would be automatically updated on your clock. I mean, your personal computer and I think your iPhone automatically updates. Okay, if you've got a clock a bit like that one hanging on the back of the wall, someone's got to pull it off the wall and move the hour forward by an hour. But one can imagine in 10 or 20 years' time, it will all be iPhones and computer systems. And at that point, we can just get Bill Gates to write an algorithm that chops and changes according to almost the weather forecast, right? A minute here, a minute there. A bit like the extreme obscurity of leap years. Would you welcome that? Because at the moment, the opportunity cost is basically because we're still quite heavily reliant on rudimentary mechanical technology, right?
Well, I mean, I don't really accept that will happen. I mean, I don't think Big Ben is going to go digital in the next 20 years. I mean, there will still be a huge number of clocks, from the legacy period of analog, which will still need manual attention. But if you're asking me to speculate on the principle of it, the hypotheticals of it, I suppose, in principle, if you really did have no labour involved in doing it whatsoever, I suppose you could change it a little bit more. Either way, I'm not convinced it's a big enough issue to put that kind of effort into.
Peter, let me come back to you, then I'll come to the floor for questions, so catch my eye if there's anybody from the floor who'd like to raise a question.
On the question of not caring about it, nobody cares about it until after a few weeks of enduring whatever the authorities have done to them. They say, why is it pitch black? Why am I always eating breakfast in the dark? Or why is it that I can't put the children to bed because Newsnight is on and it's still light? People understand this thing only after it's happened. They don't grasp it while it's going on, because time is quite difficult to grasp and quite difficult to calculate. It's after it's happened, when the fait accompli has taken place, as it did with the introduction of this ludicrous thing, that people begin to wonder why it is that they do it. Of course, the other problem is that we're all so passive and flaccid. They can do practically anything to us now that they like, and we'll just sit there and take it, which is one of the reasons why I do think it's important. You shouldn't be so passive about what the authorities do to you. You've got to put your clock forward. Okay, I'll get up and put them. What sort of person does that? I'll tell you what sort of person. A serf does it.
I wonder if I'm pressing you just a bit further on this, because other than sort of an act of defiance, I mean, what you said is your argument is there appears to be no case whatsoever for doing this. So it's not as if it's not as if the Westminster establishment obviously benefit from it and the rest of us therefore have to fall in line. So why on earth do you think that this bizarre custom, as you see it, has persisted, given there are no benefits or no obvious accrual of benefits to a particular...
The amazing power of small numbers of fanatics to get weird legislation through in wartime, or indeed at other times, or not get it through and just make it through. And metrication is another example of this. The metric system is immensely inferior to what it's replaced. You can't divide anything by 3 anymore. This has been imposed on us with total lack of any kind of protest, without even an act of parliament enforcing it, because some fanatics want us to have them, because we all have to be exactly the same. No country, no culture can have any individual characteristics. We all have to be the same. And when they make us the same, we do as we're told. People say, German... people have talking about plots and conspiracies. Look, I think we all know that in our society people do get together privately to obtain objects which they share, and they do it knowing full well they're not particularly popular by doing it privately. This is called lunch. If you want to call it a conspiracy, you may, but it isn't helpful to call it that because it makes it sound silly. As if people are sitting around whispering in taverns in Deptford with big hats on like Guy Fawkes. People do conspire to do things, and if you say, well, why do the Germans care about what time we observe? You just have to ask yourself why it was when they had the power to impose time on occupied nations. That was one of the first things they did. Time is like language. It's a sign of power. If you can get people, if all the street signs, if here it says Great Peter Strasse outside, then it would be a sign that we were governed by another culture, another power. Time is the same. That's why it's dark in Kashgar at 10 o'clock in the morning, because the Chinese government doesn't tolerate anybody having any other time, even though the time they're actually given is mad, and it doesn't get light at 10 in the morning. These are important things, and the fight over, for instance, where the meridian should be, was a power struggle. Look at the history of it. They care. If they care, I care. And it always seems to me to be, as with metrication, if it's so important to them, then it becomes important to me. They must have a reason for wanting to oppose it.
This was introduced when we were fighting the bloody Germans. Yeah. Loki was an English builder. Where does he? I don't understand where he fits into.
Actually, the thing was introduced, as I pointed out, by Kaiser Wilhelm II. Who had also been...
Well, he did it first.
He was the first person to do it. Who was also partly because he didn't have any bother with a stupid, annoying parliament. Just tell the Reichstag to pass it, and through it went. But he was the first, and everyone else followed because they thought, gosh, well, maybe they're right. Maybe shell production will now go up in the Second Reich. I don't think it did, but they thought it might, so they all did the same and copied it, and everybody fell in. That's the history of it. Wartime gives fanatics a wonderful opportunity to impose. I was very, very fortunate that nobody who spoke Esperanto was around at the time.
Why did we?
We'd all be speaking there.
But why did we choose to follow suit? I mean, you're great Peter Strauss. I mean, why did we decide, given the Germans were our enemies?
Panic, because we thought maybe it worked, and therefore, probably Lord Northcliffe would have come along and said, "You're not producing enough shells because you didn't do what the Germans had done." So it's panic. It's like the mad things we do whenever a bomb goes off somewhere, and immediately cancel another 10% of our civil liberties because we think it might make us safer. Panic is a very strong motor, especially in wartime, of human behaviour, and particularly of government behaviour. They've got to have something to do. They can't actually do very much. Passing measures like this makes them look as if they're doing something effective. That's how it happened.
Well, what actually
double in the Second World War.
What actually happens is during wartime, people pull out every stop to make the economy more efficient.
And they don't.
And the Germans, often quite rightly stereotyped as being very good at efficiency, came up with this idea, realised that they needed to do it, not so much actually for production, but for fuel efficiency, for saving money on fuel. And it worked, and that's why we copied it. There was already this campaign to bring it in, but it did take the First World War and the need to maximise every part of the...
Where's the evidence that it worked?
Well, they did it again and again and again. They did it again.
That's not evidence it works. That's not evidence it works. That's evidence they did. I actually tried to read the debates on imposing this on Britain. I've seen nothing in them in the way of evidence at all.
It's interesting that
it's completely absent.
I don't know the data.
I can find any. I'd love to see it.
But do you accept this sort of prima facie to me? I don't know the data at all. But the prima facie, there would appear to be a case, wouldn't there, that if, for example, I mean, Chris couched his argument in terms of stopping CO2 emissions, but if, for example, you were attempting to be fuel efficient as an economy in a time of war, and that people didn't sort of slowly adapt to getting up, I don't know, 45 minutes after whenever the sun rose, and you had huge industrial munitions plants, it would seem, at least on the face of it, I don't know what the empirical evidence says, but it seems like prima facie, you would assume that is the sort of thing that could make a fuel saving. No?
Well, people often assume things, but I'm interested in what actually happens. I haven't seen no evidence that this actually works. There is certainly in modern times, some of the United States, where states vary very much on how they do this. Some of the studies seem to have shown that far from decreasing the use of power, it increases the use of power because it increases the use of air conditioning at certain times of day when people hadn't previously bothered to use it. It works both ways. I don't think there's any serious evidence of major differences in power usage caused by clock shifts.
Well, one point, Chris, then I'm going to come to the floor for a couple of questions.
Yeah, I don't know how much empirical evidence is this, but I think there's a very strong remark, a very strong logical prima facie case that you're going to use less power when it's light than when it's dark, just on lighting alone. And I think the fact that we then went back to it in the Second World War, and then a couple of years into the Second World War we went to British Summertime +1, suggests that maybe they thought there was something onto it. I can't believe that everyone was just dispelled into this collective German delusion that this was the right thing to do. And then in 1947, when there were major fuel shortages, they did it again. So perhaps every government was totally misguided, didn't look at any evidence at all. I suspect they probably did look at the evidence and they realised it made sense. It's quite right, in Indiana there is a study that comes up all the time if you Google this particular issue, showing that actually it doesn't make much difference to fuel efficiency, and that is because of air conditioning. Well, air conditioning, let's face it, is not a big issue in the summertime, let alone the wintertime in Britain. Now the other reason that it didn't on net reduce fuel use was they included motoring, and rightly so, but it just happens that people, as I said in my opening remarks, people go out and do things more. Now I don't consider that waste. I consider waste to be putting the lights on when you didn't need to be putting the lights on, because we're wasting light in the morning. I don't consider it waste for people to be driving off and enjoying themselves to go watch baseball games tonight.
Let's take a couple of questions from the floor. We've got the microphone at the back, have we? So can we wait till the microphone gets to you? I'll take the two here in the third row. If you could just introduce yourself and keep your question relatively brief, I'd appreciate it.
My name is Tom Byrne. Peter's right that it's about power, and Chris is also right that it's about convenience. But convenience for who? Because governments assert power, but also employers assert power. Assert power by having to work this 9 till 5 every day, and then that seeps into other aspects of life where you must do as your employer says. So, mostly for Chris, is it just a collective action problem, or is there an actual power element behind as well?
And then gentleman next to you.
Will Duffield. So it seems as though this year, and more often in Europe, the step forward in terms of time falls on Easter Sunday. How would Chris Snowden defend this violation of our religious liberties? Obviously, days or an hour is being stolen from a day that's very important to many folks, and in exchange we're given another hour in the fall, which we don't care about very much at all. So how would you defend this?
Okay, well those are actually sort of two really to Chris, so I'm going to take a couple of others in the hope that there might be a challenge to Peter. Let me go to Ben at the back, and then I'll go to the gentleman at the front.
Peter, it strikes me that your argument is possibly internally inconsistent. Inconsistent.
Oh, well, make it my job.
Possibly inconsistent. So the reason why it's bad, French time, for example, and Western Chinese time is bad, is because they don't have enough time. There seems to be an objective ebb and flow to a day when you should have hours of sun, when you should have hours of dark. It seems to me that you could make the same argument for a year. Within the UK, we become more like Paris at some part of the year and more like Peking at the other part of the year. Shouldn't we let our time move with when we shift across the country, for example? Just as you should, when you fly across the US, you go across different time zones. When we change to be more like those different time zones, shouldn't we let ourselves go with them? That's what it strikes me. That's what would have happened 1,000 years ago. Say people would have gone with the light, and it also seems like that might be an inconsistency in your argument.
Thanks. Let me take this gentleman at the back as well, and then I'll come back and I'll come to you next. Would you mind just introducing yourself? Sorry, that was Ben from the outside.
This question for Peter, more of a challenge. A lot of our law can be traced all the way back to the Old Testament. So regarding the adjustment of daylight, so people can have daylight, doesn't the book of Joshua set a good precedent?
What precedent did you suggest?
I thought time stopped during Joshua, didn't it?
Yeah, so they had more daylight. So they at least
to complete the battle, yes. Well, it's a nice story. I think I'm prepared to give it a bit of a...
Okay, well, Peter, let me come to you. Ben was asking about it isn't actually the natural thing to do to adapt your time according to keeping a certain consistency.
I think I did address this, that you compromise by having a time zone, and it's within national territory. Now, of course, if you're actually an empire masquerading as a nation like the United States, then you can't do that, because it's too big. If they tried to, and it also it's more or less a free country, so if they tried to impose New York time and Los Angeles, they get in a lot more trouble than they get in Kashgar, because they can't send the riot police in to make them abide by it, which they can and do in Kashgar. They can abide by all kinds of things. It's a matter of compromise, and the compromise would seem to me to be a reasonable one within a nation of the sort of size that we are. You can have one time. And where you set it, I mean, there might be an argument for having it a little further west than Greenwich if you really wanted to, but the differences are generally so small that it doesn't matter. Although you might be able to make an argument for having a separate time zone, for instance, for the Republic of Ireland, if you wanted to. But then what would Northern Ireland do, probably out of sheer spite, if you would adopt a different time, which would make life inconvenient for everybody in that island. It's not a set matter. What I do think actually is that people should choose a time which is as close as it can practicably be to what the real time is on their territory. And if that means time zones, then fine. If it means one time in one country, then fine as well. But what I don't like is having these things imposed upon me by foreign powers. And what I don't like is having arbitrarily moved about because of an unproven theory about the benefits of getting up earlier or going to bed later being forced on me. And also, I just simply don't like being told what to do.
Chris, on you, Tom asked, do you think there is any kind of power element on this? I mean, Peter was suggesting it's not some complex conspiracy, but it's part of a kind of, I'm putting words in his mouth, sort of a typical bureaucratic approach to just sort of get us to do things, however trivial and unproven. What do you think the power element is? And then I thought that was an interesting question, given that you conceded that you only want to shift the clocks twice a year. You rejected my Bill Gates algorithmic solution to perfecting it on each and every day. Do you think it's culturally insensitive to knock an hour out of Easter Sunday, an important religious day for many people in this country? Should we start avoiding days that may have, amongst a proportion, potentially quite a high proportion of the population, pretty big significance? We slashed Easter Sunday to 23 hours. That's a bit of two fingers to Christians in our country, isn't it?
Well, on the PowerPoint, the nudge people like to talk about choice architecture, and one of the things they say quite reasonably is that you can accuse the nudges of imposing their vision of society or their will on you, but there is always choice architecture, right? And in the same way, Peter is claiming that he's trying to liberate people from being told what to do, but actually he's just trying to tell you what to do in a way that suits him because he gets up too early, he can't go back to sleep. And every argument that's been used is really just about that. And because he can't get back to sleep, we all have to suffer gloomy evenings. So somebody, hopefully the majority in a democracy will be deciding what the time is. Now he thinks it should be decided by God or whatever is controlling this.
It has been decided by God.
But it hasn't, because God didn't invent the 24-hour clock. God didn't invent schedules and timetables and 60 minutes and an hour and 60 seconds and a minute. These are man-made constructions. We can change them to serve us. On the point about Easter, well, I mean, I think there is a legitimate thing here, which Peter's already brought up to this EU directive. The EU does tell us when we've got to change our clocks. I think I'm right in saying that the EU only copied what we were already doing.
No, it's not. No, the old British Summertime Act, which was replaced by the EU directive, actually exempted Easter Sunday. If the calculation led to the clocks going forward on Easter Sunday, it would be another Sunday, because we are still more or less nominally a Christian country, and this amendment was inserted, so you couldn't put the clocks forward on Easter Sunday. Since it became an EU directive, the EU being a wholly secular body, it is Easter Sunday and gets staffed. Which means if your church happens to have its Easter celebration at 9:30 in the morning, it's a pain in the neck.
Okay.
And just so I'm clear, the position prior to that was the Brits would either set it the previous or the following, the subsequent.
Yeah, they would deliberately not do it on Easter Sunday. It was in the law that it would not be Easter Sunday. But when it became an EU directive, Easter Sunday was the settled date.
Okay, but my point is not really so much related to Easter Sunday, which I don't care about as a degenerate. It's about the EU telling us when to change the clocks, which there is. It's totally asymmetrical. We put the clocks back 2 months before the shortest day of the year, and we put them forward again 3 months later, they should be going back, if they have to. We have to have GMT at all, and I'm not convinced we do, in England at least. It should be changed again in the end of February, not the end of March. And the fact that we can't do that, even if we wanted to because of the EU, I think is another good reason to.
Hang on, you said we don't need so your favoured prescription is for us to be on British summertime permanently, is it?
I do see it's a bit difficult if you're in the Highlands of Scotland. I do appreciate that.
Hang on, I thought your whole argument was based around the importance of changing to reflect the seasons. If we're on one standard time and you're picking BST and Peter is picking GMT, all of the advantages of the shift are lost.
No.
Oh, you're saying BST and BST plus one?
No, I would say probably. But BST, I think, all around the year would not pose any real problems, and it would probably have an advantage, particularly sort of early November and certainly in March and probably end of February. I do see that in December it's trickier. If it's still dark at 9 o'clock, which it would be in a lot of Scotland, I do see that.
It would be in London.
I think. If that's the case, then yeah. I think we've more or less got the right.
Milkmaids and Scotsmen who need it.
I think we've more or less got the right system. It would be particularly rough if you're in the Highlands of Scotland. It probably is pretty rough in the Highlands of Scotland anyway. We may not be tenant to Scotland much longer, so it might be a dead letter. But yeah, I think broadly we've got a decent compromise at the moment. Only an unreasonable person could possibly disagree with it. But maybe we should be putting the clocks forward at the end of February, not the end of March.
Gentleman at the front wanted to come in, and then I'll go to Ralph at the back. If anybody else wants to come in, just catch my eye. Sir, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself as well.
Since I'm going to, John Evans, Windsor Ones Passenger Association. Since I'm going to direct my question to Peter, let me at least make peace with him to start with by saying I always keep all my watches on GMT. Mainly because it's too much of a fiddle to move digital watches on British summertime, or at least to move them back at the end of the season. But during the war, I was a schoolboy and we had double British summertime, and we all enjoyed it. I did my homework by the light produced by having double British summertime. And in the winter, when we didn't have it, I didn't do as much homework. In fact, I probably didn't. None. The alternative would have been to do it by gaslight. So my question to you is, why did we all enjoy having British summertime, a double British summertime, so much for the years of World War II?
And then let me take Ralph from the back. I can't. And there's a third hand up as well. So I'll go to Ralph first, and then the gentleman there just on the aisle.
Just picking up on a couple of points Mark made. If Chris is right and the switch is so valuable, why not expand that? You've rejected Mark's sort of 10-minute increments, but why not do it twice? So, if it's getting light at 3:40, not much use. If it's getting light at 4:40, it's still not much use. Why not keep going and do it every quarter? And isn't he also right that technology is going to wipe out half the arguments here, not only in automating everyone's clocks, but also Uber and driverless cars wiping out train timetables and robots wiping out a lot of sort of workplace and automation and giving us more leisure time anyway, and Netflix wiping out TV schedules. Isn't it all going to become irrelevant in about 20 years anyway?
And then there's a gentleman on the aisle here, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself again, please.
Joshua Harris, I'm a member of the insufficiently maligned late risers community. I'd like to point out actually on Peter's side, in that I value the hours of money that can be wasted by my CB3. So moving to BST or BST plus 1 would be to my detriment.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. You value the fact, you value wasting time.
No, what I'm saying is the measurement of good lying is the number of hours of sunlight in the morning you waste.
Right.
A noble position.
Certainly a position of integrity. So Peter, John specifically, particularly challenged you on it. Seemed BST double or plus 2 was very popular during the war. Do you accept that that's true or not?
No, I have no idea whether it's true or not. And I can't say that the experience of one individual would change my mind. Also, I don't see what's wrong with doing on homework by gaslight. I think gaslight's rather nice. But when you can get it. It is the case that when Portugal was compelled into the equivalent a few years ago, there was a huge amount of discontent, particularly among parents who couldn't get their children to go to bed, and school teachers who were appalled at the way that the children were falling asleep in class, and there was a general stretch on people's lives being made by it, which was so unpopular that they actually voted to get rid of it. And that's the most modern instance of what happens when people are forced to abide by a time which has almost nothing to do with their own individual circumstances. So you may enjoy, but my whole point remains this: whatever you enjoy, you're very welcome to do. And that's fine by me. Once you start shifting time away from its default natural position to suit yourself, because of what you prefer, then you're telling other people what to do, and you're not entitled to it. And we should start from the position that you need to have a very good argument to move things away from where they normally are. If people started saying we're changing the measures by the weight by which things are sold to suit the half of the population which sells things rather than half the population which buys them, and the people who bought things would object if they suddenly found that a pound, which we no longer use, only had 12 ounces in it, because the people who made the goods felt that was going to be more advantageous to them. They said, well, hang on, we actually quite liked it having 16 ounces in it, and we feel cheated by this. As it is, the people who take one side in this get it all their way, and their way is an unnatural way which involves ignoring natural reality and telling lies about the time. And I think that it is straightforwardly dishonest. By the way, another good reason for keeping at least one timepiece on Greenwich Mean Time is that you can then work out what's going to be on the BBC World Service, which continues to use GMT throughout the year. Bless it.
And I just wonder, you made reference to it, but what other areas of measurement do you think fall into this category? You were suggesting metric, decimalisation of being changes of the same radical changes, but and you're arguing to no purpose. This was sort of busybody bureaucrats.
For the purpose of utopian fanatics, and they are always utopian. They start from the metric system. We could have another argument about this for those few of us who care. But the metric system was developed pretty much in laboratories and introduced by government. The customary system, which was in existence before, was developed by people, and the difference between the measurements is often that the measurements in customary systems are based upon human capacity and the human body, whereas the measurements in the metric system are arbitrary and based on
the size of the Earth.
They're actually based on the complete miscalculation of the circumference of the Earth, because the people who were doing it got lost on the way and made up their figures afterwards. That is a historical fact. Also, the original metric liquid measurement, the steer, was so huge that even 5 horses couldn't conceivably have drunk one, so they had to introduce the litre instead. It doesn't actually fit with the metric system at all. It was invented later on.
But if they've got it right, I think Chris's point was, would you then consider that to be a natural measurement?
No, it's still basically arbitrary. Saying it's a proportion of something else. Whereas the yard is the pace. A foot is a foot. A pound is what you can lift, what you can hold in your hand. A pint is what you can drink. Whereas all these little methods are all just invented out of nowhere. And interestingly enough, if you go, here we are. If you go into schools on the continent, what is the length of the ruler in a French or a German or a Dutch school? It's 30 centimetres. It's a foot. What do French people ask for their beer in measure of demi-pression? It's not half a litre. It's half a pint. And it's all over the place. These things continue in use. If you buy butter from a Normandy farmer, he'll sell it to you in a livre. Long after, 200 years after.
So what's the problem?
Because these things continue in common use because people like them. They're familiar and polished in use. They're natural and human. They weren't imposed by government. And however hard government tries to impose these things on people from above, hundreds of years later, after dictatorial governments and mad terrors and all the rest, people are still quietly using the natural customary measurements that they like.
And nobody's quite getting away with 100 years later, we're the only people even discussing it.
Apart from the United States of America, that backward country, which we went to the moon in miles, yards, and feet. We liberated Europe in miles, yards, feet, pounds, and ounces, whereas the concentration camps were all measured in meters, and the Russians are doled out in kilograms.
Chris, let me come to you. Then I'll take the last couple of interventions from the floor and ask you for your last word. On Ralph's point, which was building on my own, you're a bit of a central planning socialist, don't you? You want the trains to run on time, everything about these mechanical timetables, and actually the great new libertarian free market world is one in which we won't need to worry about this at all.
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I'm not very convinced that technology is going to save us in that respect, but I mean, my argument against, I'm not too bothered, but my argument against doing it again between March and June is that actually you get to a point where you've got more daylight than you need. It's about managing scarce resources. When you get to June, you actually have only about 5 hours of night time anyway. So long as you've got a nice long evening stretching out till 10 o'clock, I don't really care if it gets light at 4:40 or something, even though most people are still going to be asleep. So I don't think there's a huge impetus to...
Because it's less of a scarce resource.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want... I don't want light wasting when people are asleep, but if you've only got 5 hours of darkness and people need 8 hours sleep, you inevitably are going to waste a certain amount, so you can't do any both. And on the referendum point, the Portugal was on, I'll come back to that. I mean, it's horses for courses. Western Australia experimented with daylight saving time, and they had a referendum to get rid of it. Portugal, as Peter says, weren't too keen. I think there is a case in very hot countries. I think there is more of an incentive to do things early in the day, because it's the only time you can before things get too hot. And I think that was the issue in Western Australia. If you want to go for a game of golf, it actually makes more sense to do it at the crack of dawn than it does to do it at tea time. So horses, of course, let the people decide. I'm quite sure that if we did, I'm not keen on having a referendum, but if it came to a vote, I'm quite sure that Peter's side of the argument would be crushed on it.
So am I.
I think I've got one more two more from the back. Gentlemen, again, if you can introduce yourselves, I know who you are, but the rest of the audience.
Rory Lincoln, no affiliation to this question. So at the time when the sun is perfectly over at the highest point, why is the number 12 natural and the number 11 man-made?
It's because 12 represents noon on a 24-hour clock. That's all. It doesn't matter what number it is. It's simply noon on sundials, which in some cases predated that. It simply is noon that's measured. And noon is a natural event, as is sunrise and as is sunset. These things happen.
I'm guessing you'd be opposed to the sort of the 10-hour day or the decimalised day.
Can anybody think of a good reason for it, apart from the fact that it's just neater?
On that, a very good reason for decimalisation. A kilogram of water is 1 litre, is 1 decimetre cube, is 10 centimetres by 10 centimetres by 10 centimetres. Incredibly convenient. Your entire world functions because the maths of standard units is really, really easy. You can do physics, maths, and chemistry and biology because we have standardised units in decimal. And a kilogram of water being a 10 centimetre cube, being a litre, is phenomenally useful. But Peter acknowledged that the maths only functions to make the world work because of standardised units.
So who is it useful?
To everyone trying to do any maths beyond...
So you don't need to say a kilogram of water, a kilogram is 0.8734 of a litre or whatever.
Well, no, but actually a pint of water in the United States is also a pound. These things match, but ultimately, who cares? It doesn't make a difference. If you can't do mental arithmetic, I'm sorry for you. But this sort of toe counting peasant method, 10 of this, 10 of that, it's not very sophisticated. We have a huge measuring system, and you can't divide it by 3. The system which can't be divided by 3, and in many cases can't be divided by much else, because it's based on the number of toes that a peasant has. What is so sophisticated, advanced, and scientific about that?
Chris, final thoughts Peter, as our guest here, I'll give him the chance to have the last word. But Chris, you might want to reflect on any of the points that have been raised by the floor, by Peter, or even by me. Give us your parting shots of wisdom.
Well, on this metric one, I mean, you're quite right. There is a beautiful simplicity and usability to the metric system. I mean, maybe it doesn't have the romance and authenticity and biblical, roots that imperial measurements have. But again, who really cares? Obviously, I'm not in favour of people being prosecuted for selling things in old money. But apart from that, who cares? Let 1,000 flowers bloom, see what works best. And this, it's symptomatic of, Peter's kind of reactionary view of everything, that everything just has, whatever was in the Bible was the best, whatever we used 100 years ago is the best, regardless of any of the objective and the subjective benefits of it. There's a wonderful old book called Roads to Ruin, which looks at basically reactionary arguments against what now seem perfectly sensible and progressive, in the best sense of the word, measures. And the last chapter is all about daylight saving time. And some of the arguments over the very long battle that it took to bring this measure in, very amusing in retrospect, to me at least. I think people were saying that people wouldn't go to the theatre in the daylight, that cricket matches wouldn't finish in time for the results to be published in the paper the next day, that it emulated the Germans, we've heard plenty of that argument this evening, that people wouldn't be awake at 2 a.m. to change the clocks, that working class people would start having breakfast in the pub.
This has happened, I think.
That firework companies would go bust because firework displays would have to start too late for people who want to go to them. That it would harm the candle making and matchstick industry. That it would harm people who told the time by the sun. That it would harm people who told the time with sundials. That it was a plot to get the working classes out of bed earlier. And this one, my favourite one, is that what would happen if a mother was giving birth to twins on the day that the clocks were going back, and the first one popped out just before the clock went back, the second one popped out after the clocks went back, and it would look on the birth certificate as if the first one born was actually the second one. These are the kind of specious, vexatious and frivolous complaints made about this at the time, all I think largely because nobody had ever done it before, and it seemed that if it was such a good idea, people would have done it sooner. But actually it was just covering up unreasonable fears and this sort of naturalistic fallacy, as I've already said, the idea that because something has always been like this and because we have the sun in the sky, that we all must have a mystical attachment to it. But actually when you boil it down, we will always use the arguments that suit our purposes to do with the climate change and the carbon dioxide and so on. But what it really comes down to is that I think it's better for the evenings to be light, and I think that can be shown objectively, whereas Peter gets up too early, and because of his insomnia, we all have to suffer gloomy, dark evenings. It's only now that it's getting dark. He wants it to be like this at 6:30. Absolutely disgraced.
Peter, the floor and the last word is yours.
I want it to be winter all the time, but that's the nature of melancholics. But I wouldn't actually want to impose it on those who didn't agree with me, and that really remains the point. Do you want to tell other people how to live their lives, or do you want to leave them to live their lives as they want to? And shifting the clock away from where it naturally is, which is indisputable, is messing around with other people's lives. And it's as simple as that. Do you want to do that, or don't you? And anybody who uses the word progress, haven't we learned anything from the whole of the 20th century? We had so much progress in the 20th century. Does anybody want more? This is progress you see sitting here opposite me. It's the face of progress, naked in the field, in the glaring light caused by the clocks being pushed forward. And I urge you to not have any more progress.
Thank you. Listen, ladies and gents, just before I thank our two speakers, I think on your chairs you'll find an invitation hot off the press to our Hayek lecture, our annual Hayek lecture. That's on Wednesday, June the 8th at 6:45 p.m. Not here at Church House, which is just round the corner. There's a mat for you on the back, and the lecture is on the subject of price stability and financial stability without central banks by George Selgin. Please do register for that if you want to come, because that's usually a sellout long before we actually get to the date. We've also left EA Magazine, the latest edition of that, on your chairs. If you've already got a copy, please feel free to take another one and give it to someone who you think it may be of interest. Thank you for joining us as the light has faded over the last 90 minutes. I hope you're able to make your way back to the other room on the other side of the reception to join us for a drink.
And some tennis. There'll be tennis.
But a particular thanks to Chris, and I think, and even more so to Peter, our guest, for a thoroughly entertaining and informative discussion, and not the sort of debates you often find in Westminster anymore. So thank you to the two of you.
Something out here before people say this is also boring and I'm obsessed with it. I didn't suggest this to them.
Fantastic. Thank you, ladies and gents. Please do come and join us for a drink.